If you can fix this thing in 10 minutes, I'll marry you myself. The words sliced through the hum of machinery like a knife. Every head in the Voltage Motors testing lab turned toward the woman in the navy blazer, her diamond badge glinting under the sterile lights. Vivian Cole, 42, CEO, composed, terrifying, stood with her arms crossed as the red warning lights blinked across the prototype EV engine. The room smelled of ozone and hot metal. The investors behind her whispered nervously, checking their watches. A multi-million-dollar presentation had just gone up in smoke. Across the floor, Malik Turner froze. He wore a gray maintenance jumpsuit that had seen better days. The Voltage logo frayed at the sleeve. His hands were still blackened from repairing the freight elevator earlier that morning. He hadn't meant to be in this room. Someone had called him by mistake when the lead engineer stormed out. Now all eyes were on him. The wrong man at the wrong time. He could feel his heartbeat in his throat. Vivian arched an eyebrow. Well? You heard me. You're supposed to be the mechanic around here, aren't you? A few young techs chuckled. Malik wiped his palms on his jumpsuit and walked toward the silent machine. Yes, ma'am, he said quietly. Just let me take a look. He didn't look at her again. He'd seen that kind of smirk before from lieutenants, from supervisors, from men and women who thought blue collars came with blue souls. The prototype's main module was still warm, too warm. He crouched, fingers tracing the cable bundle, feeling where the insulation thinned. He smelled it before he saw it, the sharp, chemical tang of a coolant leak. Beside the door, Rusty, the brown rescue dog that followed him everywhere, gave a soft whine. Easy, boy, Malik murmured. He reached into his tool belt, found a bent Allen key, and loosened a housing screw. Sparks popped. Sir, you shouldn't touch that. One engineer gasped. Malik ignored him. He unplugged a connector, twisted two leads together, and used the key as a makeshift bridge. 5 minutes, he muttered under his breath. His pulse steadied. He'd done this kind of job at sea, when entire ship systems failed and nobody had the luxury of panic. There was always a way if you listened carefully to the hum, to the rhythm of power itself. He reached under the control board, reset a safety fuse manually, then hit the diagnostic override. The screen flickered, blinked amber, then turned steady green. The machine coughed once, twice, and roared back to life. The electric motor purred like a giant cat stretching after sleep. The laughter stopped. Silence spread through the room. A bead of sweat slid down Vivian's temple. She stared at the display as if she could bend it back to red with her will. System stable. The computer intoned. Malik rose slowly, wiping his hands with a rag. He didn't smile. He simply said, "All good now, ma'am." The lead investor cleared his throat. Well, that's impressive. Another engineer muttered, "He actually did it." Vivian's mouth tightened. She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Lucky guess, she said. Malik looked at her then. Really looked the perfect hair. The pressed suit. The gleaming smartwatch that probably cost more than he'd made in 6 months. But her eyes were tired. Defensive. He almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Ma'am, he said softly. You don't owe me marriage. Just maybe a little respect. The words landed heavier than he expected. Someone coughed to hide a laugh. A few faces turned away to avoid hers. Vivian's voice hardened. Back to work. All of you. She turned sharply toward the board members, gesturing them toward the conference room, her heels striking the floor like small explosions. Malik exhaled. He leaned against the workbench as the others filed out, leaving him and the humming machine alone. Rusty padded over, tail wagging. Guess we're still employable for another day, Malik whispered, rubbing the dog's ears. He could feel his pulse beginning to slow. For a moment, the air was calm again, just the sound of the motor, the soft hum of victory no one would remember. He bent to pick up his wrench. It was old, heavy, the name Turner's Tools, engraved faintly along the handle. His father's. A relic from another life, another kind of dignity. He stared at it and thought of the day his father had told him. The world respects what it needs, not who you are. Make yourself needed. He'd been 13 then. That sentence had built the walls around his patience ever since. The door opened again. A young technician, white coat, clipboard, peeked in. Hey, Turner, she said cautiously. That was impressive. Don't expect credit though. Miss Cole hates being upstaged. Malik smiled faintly. Wasn't looking for credit. Still, she said, glancing down at Rusty, you might want to keep your head low. She's got a temper. He nodded, and she left. He could already feel the unease settling back into the air, like dust after a storm. He turned off the diagnostic screen, grabbed his tools, and gave the machine one last look. The motor's rhythmic vibration sounded almost alive. "Stay running, buddy," he whispered to it. "They need you more than they know." As he walked down the hall toward the maintenance bay, his reflection trailed in the polished floor, a man invisible in plain sight, carrying the weight of other people's mistakes. Rusty trotted beside him, claws clicking lightly. Somewhere above, in the glass-walled conference room, Vivian's voice echoed through the intercom. "We can't afford another malfunction. Delete the error logs before the media team sees them." Malik paused. His brow furrowed. He looked up, as though her words had traveled directly to him. "Delete the logs?" His fingers tightened on the wrench. He said nothing, but a thought took root, quiet, stubborn, unshakable. The kind of thought that could change everything. For a long moment, he stood there listening to the distant whir of machines, to the heartbeat of a company that didn't yet know it was sick. Then he whispered, half to himself, half to the dog. "Justice doesn't always start in court, Rusty. Sometimes it starts with a bad smell and a bent wrench." The dog tilted his head, and Malik smiled faintly. "Come on, partner, let's see what else they've been hiding." He flicked off the lab lights, the hum fading into the distance, and walked back into the maze of hallways where the truth waited like another broken machine, daring him to fix it. The next morning, Detroit's winter light filtered through the frosted windows of Voltage's maintenance wing. The building hummed with quiet energy, a mechanical heartbeat of machines waking to another day of ambition. Malik arrived early, coffee from the vending machine warming his hands, Rusty trotting loyally beside him. He didn't belong here, not really. His badge said, facilities contractor. But most of the engineers treated him like part of the furniture. He'd learned to blend into the hum, the same way sailors learn to disappear into the sound of the sea. In the corner of the lab, he caught sight of the prototype he'd revived the day before. It sat motionless under a tarp, as if ashamed of its near death. Malik checked the diagnostic port. Someone had already wiped the data. The screen read, "System cleared, no errors logged." He exhaled slowly. So they'd deleted the evidence after all. His fingers brushed the edge of the console, still faintly warm. "They're covering something, Rusty," he murmured. The dog looked up, ears twitching. A few minutes later, the hallway filled with the clipped rhythm of heels. Vivian Cole swept past with her assistant, a sleek tablet in hand, discussing investor calls. Her perfume clean, sharp lingered in the air. She didn't look at Malik, didn't acknowledge him. But he noticed the faint tremor in her voice as she said, "Make sure the recall notice never hits the press." That one sentence tightened something in his chest. Vivian reached the elevator, the doors sliding shut with a metallic sigh, leaving silence in her wake. Malik leaned against the railing, eyes narrowing. He remembered her smirk from yesterday, the way she'd turned his work into a punchline. But what clung to him wasn't anger, it was something deeper, the uneasy feeling of a man who'd seen this kind of arrogance before, and knew how many people it could hurt. He headed toward the basement workshop where old parts and forgotten prototypes slept under dust. It was quiet there. His refuge. He plugged his worn laptop into a power outlet, and opened the file he'd saved from yesterday, the backup log he'd secretly mirrored during the repair. On the screen blinked lines of code. Temperature readings, timestamps, error codes repeating like a heartbeat. P0C3A. 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 The same fault, suppressed again and again. The system had overheated before. More than once. And someone had forced manual resets to silence the alarms. Whoever it was, they'd been hiding it for months. Malik rubbed his temples. "If that battery goes into full run mode during a demo," he muttered, "it won't just stall, it'll burn." Rusty gave a low growl, as if agreeing. Malik closed the laptop and tucked it away. He couldn't prove anything yet, not without being accused of tampering. He'd seen good men fired for less. He'd learned in the Navy that truth was like a live wire, touch it wrong and it burns you first. Still, he couldn't let it go. During lunch break, he sat alone in the cafeteria, eating a sandwich wrapped in foil. Across the room, engineers laughed over lattes, their voices echoing against glass and chrome. Malik's eyes wandered to a bulletin board by the exit. A photo caught his attention, a woman smiling with a microphone in hand. The caption read, "Kira Nguyen, former Voltage journalist, now independent investigative writer." He remembered her name from the local news. Years ago. She'd once exposed corporate fraud in Detroit's auto sector before being blacklisted. Maybe she'd listen. Maybe she'd know what to do with what he'd found. Later that evening, after most employees left, Malik borrowed a service car and drove downtown. The air outside bit at his skin, heavy with snow and exhaust. He parked near a small diner glowing in neon. Through the window, he spotted Kira sitting alone with a laptop and a mug of coffee gone cold. She looked older than in her photo, sharper somehow, her gaze restless but alert. Malik hesitated at the door. He'd promised himself never to get involved again, not after losing everything. But Rusty nudged his leg, and he took it as a sign. The bell chimed as he entered. "You, Kira Nguyen?" he asked quietly. She looked up, measured him in a glance. "Depends who's asking. Name's Malik Turner. I work at Voltage. I think something's wrong with the new battery systems." Her expression shifted from guarded to curious. "You're the one who fixed the engine yesterday. You saw that?" Half the city saw it. Vivian Cole's little show went viral on TikTok. People love a Cinderella mechanic story. Malik grimaced. "That's not what it was." "Then what is it?" she asked. He slid the USB drive across the table. "Proof," he said. "If you know where to look." She hesitated, studying the small device as if it were radioactive. "You realize handing me this could cost you your job? Maybe worse?" "Already lost everything once," he replied. "Nothing left to take." She nodded slowly. "Okay. I'll look into it. But if this blows up, you'll need to be ready to stand behind it." He met her eyes, steady. "I will." Outside, snow began to fall thin, silent flakes drifting past streetlights like ash. When he stepped back into the cold, Malik felt something he hadn't felt in years, a direction. The next morning at Voltage, tension hung like static. Rumors spread fast. Someone had mentioned malfunctioning safety protocols, and whispers pointed toward the engineering division. Vivian stormed through the corridors, barking orders. "Find the leak. No one speaks to the press," she shouted. Malik kept his head down, cleaning tools, invisible as always. But that afternoon, when he passed the prototype room, he noticed something strange. The access panel he'd repaired was open again. New wires gleamed, freshly soldered. And taped to the frame was a note in fine handwriting. "Do not touch, CEO inspection scheduled." His stomach dropped. They were preparing another test, likely for the investor demo mentioned on the internal bulletin. He glanced around, no one in sight. He reached into the compartment, pulled a small cable loose, and attached a micrologger the size of a thumb drive, his own insurance. Rusty whined softly, pacing at his side. Malik whispered, "Just in case they try to bury it again." He closed the panel and walked away, heart drumming like machinery. Later that night, he returned to his cot in the supply room, exhaustion pressing against his ribs. The building had gone quiet except for the hum of generators. He stared at the ceiling, thoughts circling like restless gears. He remembered the ocean, the long nights in the Navy when he'd lie awake listening to engines breathe, knowing one wrong decision could drown 100 men. He'd trusted the chain of command then. But here, in this shining tower of ambition, he trusted only the truth written in code and metal. Rusty climbed up beside him, head resting on his chest. Malik sighed. "They think people like me don't notice, don't matter," he said softly. "But somebody's got to keep the lights on." His phone buzzed a message from an unknown number. "This is Kira. I saw the logs. You were right. The fault's been masked for 6 months." She knew. Malik stared at the screen, the words glowing in the dark. He didn't smile, didn't speak. He just lay there, feeling the weight of what was coming. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows, a low, unbroken hum, the same tone that engines make before they fail. By the following week, the chill in the Voltage building no longer came from the Michigan winter but from something sharper: fear. The company was humming with whispers, everyone sensing a shift but too afraid to name it. Malik moved through the corridors like a shadow, pushing his tool cart, nodding politely when engineers passed him without really seeing him. He liked it that way. Invisibility was a kind of armor. Yet, beneath that calm exterior, he was listening, always listening to the nervous conversations that slipped through half-closed office doors. They were talking about the investor showcase, scheduled for Friday. Vivian wanted it perfect, no delays, no excuses. "This launch secures the next funding round," someone said. "We can't afford bad press." Malik paused near the elevator bay where 2 managers whispered about the same thing. The battery model V9, the one he'd fixed. It was going to be the centerpiece of the demonstration. The words made his stomach tighten. That same faulty engine, patched over, now heading into a spotlight. Rusty trotted beside him, sniffing the hallway floor, tail low. Malik whispered, "Yeah, I smell trouble too, boy." He spent the next 2 days watching, waiting, keeping his head down. Vivian's face was everywhere on banners, posters, a woman of innovation leading the future. Yet behind the image, Malik could see her unraveling. He caught glimpses of her pacing her office late at night, light glowing through the frosted glass, her reflection fractured by the blinds. Sometimes she yelled into her phone, other times she just stood still, staring at the city lights like she was trying to remember who she used to be. On Wednesday morning, Malik received a message from Kira. I traced the internal documents. Voltage hid 3 incidents tied to overheating. 1 car caught fire in Nevada. Settled quietly. His hands trembled as he read. She followed with another line. The demo is a stunt. She's gambling on silence. Malik looked around the nearly empty lab. Silence kills more than noise ever did, he muttered. The next day, Vivian called an all-hands meeting. The auditorium gleamed with banners reading Drive the Future. She stood on stage in front of 200 employees, radiating composure, but her eyes darted too often toward the back row where Malik stood leaning against a wall. Voltage is about courage and innovation, she said, her voice firm, confident. Tomorrow's demo will prove that our technology leads the industry in safety and performance. There was applause, polite and thin. Malik's gaze swept the room. Some of the senior engineers clapped without enthusiasm. A few avoided his eyes entirely. After the meeting, he cornered one of them, a weary man named David Chen, by the coffee station. David? He said quietly. You worked on the V9 cooling system, didn't you? David hesitated. Who's asking? A man who doesn't want to see this place burn. David exhaled, rubbing his forehead. I didn't approve that final patch. Vivian signed off herself. We were supposed to halt production, but she changed the documentation. So the problem's still there. Worse, David whispered. The next test runs longer, higher voltage. If that cell chain fails. He stopped when footsteps echoed. Vivian herself appeared around the corner, smiling thinly. Gentlemen, she said, is everything all right? David straightened instantly. Yes, ma'am. Just running diagnostics. Good, she said. Her gaze lingered on Malik for a second too long. Mr. Turner, I hope you're keeping busy. Always, ma'am. Excellent. We'll need all hands tomorrow. She walked away, heels clicking like a metronome of control. Malik met David's eyes again. And the man looked away. Defeated. That evening, Malik sat in the service bay, staring at the motor assembly. The hum of cooling fans filled the silence. Rusty rested at his feet, snoring lightly. Malik whispered, I could walk away. Nobody would blame me. But he didn't move. He thought about his father, about the people who'd trusted machines built by others, and how many times he'd seen arrogance write tragedies. He couldn't let this one happen. Not again. Around midnight, he sneaked into the data room. He'd memorized the security code. Engineers were careless when he cleaned around them. The lights flickered low, rows of servers humming like a choir of secrets. He inserted his flash drive, fingers flying across the keyboard. The log files loaded hidden subdirectories, timestamps altered, Vivian's signature embedded in the audit trail. She had known. She had ordered the resets. He copied everything. Suddenly, footsteps echoed outside the glass door. He yanked the drive, slipped it into Rusty's collar, and turned off the monitor. The door opened. It was Vivian. She looked immaculate even at midnight, though her eyes carried exhaustion. You're not authorized in here, she said evenly. Malik met her gaze. Just fixing the cooling vents, ma'am. At midnight? I work better when no one's watching. Her lips curved into a smile that wasn't a smile. You're a clever man, Mr. Turner. I admire that. But clever men sometimes forget who owns the place. He said nothing. She took a step closer. You fixed my engine. You saved me from embarrassment. I'm grateful. But let me give you advice: don't start thinking you're a hero. Heroes don't last long in corporations. And liars? He asked quietly. For the briefest second, her face cracked one flicker of guilt, or maybe rage, then it was gone. Go home, Mr. Turner, she said, turning toward the door. And bring that dog with you. Next time, I'll have security remove it. She left before he could reply. Malik stood there for a long time, heart pounding. Rusty looked up at him, eyes questioning. Yeah, Malik whispered. I think she knows. The next morning came gray and bitter. Trucks unloaded equipment for the investor showcase. Crews polished every surface. The air smelled of new paint and nerves. Malik moved among them, unnoticed, carrying cables and checking outlets. His mind already racing ahead. The flash drive with the data was safe. He'd mailed a copy to Kira overnight. But now came the dangerous part. They would power up the same faulty system in front of cameras, politicians, and investors. If the code failed, it wouldn't be a malfunction. It would be a disaster. As afternoon shadows stretched across the showroom, Vivian rehearsed her speech in the mirrored walls of the stage. Voltage stands for progress, for responsibility. She said to her reflection, voice crisp, every syllable perfect. But when she turned away, Malik could see her hand shaking. Maybe she was afraid. Maybe only of losing her throne. He didn't hate her, not really. He pitied her. But pity wouldn't stop what was coming. That night, long after everyone left, Malik sat beside Rusty on the loading dock, watching the snow fall in the streetlights. Tomorrow, he murmured. They'll try to prove they can't be wrong. And we'll be there when the truth decides otherwise. He looked down at the old wrench lying across his knee, the letters Turner's tools catching the dim light. He thought of his father again, the calm wisdom in his voice. Integrity's heavy, son. Most people drop it when their hands get tired. Malik tightened his grip. Not this time. The building was silent, except for the slow rhythmic hum of the prototype's charger deep inside the testing bay. To anyone else, it was just a sound. To Malik, it was a warning. Rusty raised his head and whined softly, the hair along his back standing up. Malik smiled faintly. Good ears, partner. We'll keep them honest. He rose, pocketed the wrench, and walked toward the glow of the lab lights. A quiet figure in gray, invisible to the world that would soon know his name. Friday morning broke with a brittle kind of light, the kind that made every surface of Voltage motors look sharper, colder. The parking lot shimmered with frost, and television vans lined the street outside the headquarters. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation and the faint buzz of electric current running through 1,000 wires. Today was the investor showcase, the day Vivian Cole had promised would secure Voltage's future. Malik arrived before sunrise, wearing the same gray jumpsuit, his breath visible in the chill of the loading dock. Rusty padded at his side, tail low, ears twitching. The dog seemed uneasy, restless, as if he could sense what the day held. Malik had barely slept. Every hour of the night, he'd replayed the plan in his head. Stay near the test bay, monitor the voltage feed, and be ready to cut power if things went wrong. He wasn't sure what would come after that, probably security. Maybe jail, but he knew he couldn't stand by. He walked through the glass doors and scanned his badge. The guard nodded, barely glancing at him. Morning, Turner. Big day, huh? Malik managed a small smile. Yeah. Let's hope it's a safe one. Upstairs, the atrium gleamed under floodlights. Banners hung from the ceiling, progress in motion. Cameras were being set up near the stage, cables snaking across the floor. Reporters murmured over notes, sipping coffee from branded cups. The prototype car sat under a white silk cover like a sleeping beast. Malik's eyes locked on the machine. The same model. The same heart of failure. Dressed up for the world. He took his position near the control console at the back. Part of the facility's crew on paper. But every nerve in his body was coiled like wire. Vivian entered the room surrounded by assistants and investors. She wore a white suit that reflected the light, her hair perfect, her smile bright. The crowd turned to her as if she were gravity itself. Thank you all for coming, she began, voice carrying effortlessly. Today isn't just about innovation, it's about trust. Voltage has always believed in people who dare to build the impossible. Malik's lips twitched at the irony. Rusty, hidden near the back entrance, gave a low growl. He hushed him softly. As Vivian continued her speech, Malik's eyes flicked toward the control screen. The battery temperature was already rising faster than it should. He tapped a command, quietly initiating an alternate monitoring feed. The numbers spiked again. Something wasn't right, the coolant system wasn't cycling properly. His pulse quickened. He whispered under his breath. They didn't fix it. They just painted over it. Vivian gestured grandly toward the prototype. Ladies and gentlemen, the Voltage 59, a symbol of the future. Applause broke out. She pressed the ignition pad. The car hummed to life, smooth and sleek. For a heartbeat, it looked perfect. The monitors showed steady lines, flawless readings. Vivian smiled toward the cameras. Efficiency, safety, sustainability. A sharp beep cut her off. On the monitor, a red warning flashed. Battery core temp exceeded. Malik's stomach dropped. He looked at the readings, 121 degrees Celsius and climbing. He stepped forward, hand hovering over the emergency cutoff. Don't, whispered one of the engineers beside him, fear in his eyes. You'll ruin everything. Malik shook his head. Better ruin a show than bury a few bodies. Vivian turned sharply as alarms began to chirp. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Is that part of the demo? Someone asked. Vivian forced a laugh. A small calibration issue, nothing more. But Malik could see the panic in her eyes. She pressed a command on her tablet, trying to override the warning. The temperature didn't drop. It rose faster. The air filled with the acrid scent of burning insulation. Malik shouted. Everyone stepped back. He sprinted to the breaker panel. Security moved instantly, 2 men grabbing his arms. What the hell are you doing? One barked. Saving your lives, Malik snapped. He jerked free, slammed his hand down on the master switch, and the entire lab plunged into darkness. The hum of electricity died, replaced by gasps and the shriek of failing lights. Smoke curled from the hood of the prototype. Vivian stood frozen, her white suit now haloed by the gray mist. For a long, breathless moment, there was only silence. Then the emergency lights flickered on, red and harsh. Malik was breathing hard, adrenaline pounding through his veins. It was about to go thermal, he said, voice low but clear. You were seconds away from an explosion. Vivian's face twisted with fury and humiliation. Get him out of here, she shouted. 2 guards grabbed him again, dragging him toward the exit. He sabotaged the demo, she screamed. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions. Malik didn't resist. He looked back at her and said evenly. Check your logs, Vivian. Error code P0C3A. You knew. The words hung in the air like smoke. The guards hesitated. Vivian's expression faltered. A flicker of recognition, she knew that code. The room erupted into chaos. Journalists yelling. Investors whispering, employees frozen in disbelief. Malik was pushed through the doors and down the hall. Behind him, Rusty barked frantically, pulling against his leash until the strap snapped. The dog bolted toward the stage. Rusty, no! Malik shouted, but the guards shoved him onward. Rusty darted through the crowd, sniffing the air, tail stiff. He stopped at the prototype, barking at the front wheel well, where a small puddle of coolant shimmered under the red light. The smell was sharp, chemical. Reporters turned their cameras toward the scene. One of them muttered, "There's your story." Within minutes, security alarms blared again, and the sprinklers activated. Water hissed across the stage, cooling the smoking surface. Vivian stood drenched, her white suit gray with soot, mascara running down her cheek. The crowd began to leave in silence. Outside, in the freezing air, Malik leaned against a police cruiser, wrists bound in plastic cuffs. Rusty sat beside him, shivering but unharmed, a firefighter's blanket draped over his back. You okay, partner? Malik whispered. Rusty nudged his hand, whining softly. One of the officers approached. They're saying you caused it, he said, voice neutral. Malik looked him in the eye. Then they're lying. The officer hesitated, then glanced toward the building. Funny thing, reporters are already talking about some kind of cover-up. That code you yelled, people are Googling it. Looks bad for them. Malik closed his eyes and let the cold air fill his lungs. The hard part was over. But the fight was just beginning. Inside, Vivian stood in the wreckage of her showcase, surrounded by smoke and silence. For the first time in years, she had nothing to say. Her phone buzzed a message from an unknown number. The truth always starts with one person refusing to shut up. She stared at it. Her reflection fractured in the cracked glass of the stage floor. Down the hall, Malik was being escorted out of the building, but his head was high. Rusty trotted beside him, tail flicking. As the doors opened to the snowy street, he whispered to himself. Justice doesn't need applause. It just needs to keep breathing. The wind answered with a low, steady hum, the same sound the engines made when they finally ran right. The holding room was small, windowless, and cold. A single fluorescent light buzzed overhead, flickering like it was nervous too. Malik sat at the metal table with his hands cuffed, Rusty curled at his feet, eyes half closed but alert. His jumpsuit was damp from the sprinklers, streaked with soot. Every few minutes he heard muffled voices beyond the door, security, lawyers, police officers unsure of what to do with him. He had saved a room full of people, and yet here he was, treated like a criminal. He thought of his father again, the man who'd once told him, the truth's got 2 prices. The one you pay, and the one the world pays after you say it. He smiled faintly. The world's turn would come soon. The door creaked open. A young officer stepped inside. A paper cup of coffee in hand. Here, he said awkwardly, setting it down. They said you can have this while you wait. Malik nodded, murmured thanks. The man hesitated, then lowered his voice. I saw the footage. What you did in there. That took guts. Malik met his eyes. You were in the room? No. But my sister works upstairs. If that car had gone off well, I owe you one. He looked embarrassed for saying it, and quickly left. Malik wrapped his fingers around the coffee cup, warmth seeping into his palms. He whispered, hang tight, Rusty. We're not finished yet. Hours passed. Reporters gathered outside, the story already spinning in every direction: sabotage, scandal, heroism. Inside Voltage's crisis room, Vivian Cole sat surrounded by her legal team. Her once perfect hair was damp, her white suit replaced by a dark blazer. She stared at the television screen, showing footage of the incident. Her own voice echoed from the past. If you can fix this thing in 10 minutes, I'll marry you myself. The soundbite had gone viral again, but this time it was followed by Malik's quiet defiance and the image of smoke pouring from the stage. She turned off the screen, face pale. Her assistant entered, whispering, Ma'am, the investors are demanding a statement. They're calling it a safety cover-up. Vivian pressed her fingers to her temples. We'll issue something soon. Just find the data logs. Prove he tampered with it. There's a problem, the assistant said, voice trembling. The logs are gone. Vivian's head snapped up. What? It checked the servers. The entire diagnostic chain for the V9 prototype was wiped clean, but the backup audit trail shows your authorization signature. The room went silent. Vivian stared at the assistant as if she'd been shot. That's impossible, she whispered. But it wasn't. She'd signed those resets herself. She'd buried the fault. Now it was unburied. And it had teeth. Across the city, in a small newsroom filled with the smell of coffee and printer ink, Kira Nguyen stared at her laptop screen. The flash drive Malik had sent plugged into the port. The data glowed in lines of code: temperature spikes, override commands, timestamps. Proof. Real. Damning proof. She crafted her headline carefully. Homeless mechanic saves Voltage from explosive cover. Up. Within minutes, it was live. The story spread like fire through digital channels, picked up by local affiliates, then national outlets. News anchors repeated the words, error code P0C3A, as if decoding a national secret. Social media exploded with outrage. Malik Turner, the man humiliated by a CEO, was now the man who had saved a company from burning itself alive. By late afternoon, the police released him. The same young officer returned with the paperwork. You're free to go, Mr. Turner. Someone higher up decided they don't want your name in a lawsuit. Guess you've got friends out there. Malik stretched his wrists as the cuffs came off. Didn't know I had any left. Rusty stood, tail wagging. The officer smiled. Looks like you've got one at least. As Malik stepped outside, cold air hit his face like a blessing. The parking lot buzzed with reporters. Microphones thrust toward him, questions colliding in the air. Mr. Turner, did you sabotage the prototype? Do you think Vivian Cole will face charges? How does it feel to be the face of corporate justice? He raised a hand, quieting them. I'm not the face of anything. I just fixed a machine that wasn't safe. You can decide what that means. Then he walked away. Rusty trotting beside him. The cameras flashing like lightning behind them. That evening, Vivian sat alone in her glass office, watching the skyline bleed orange with sunset. Her phone wouldn't stop vibrating: messages, missed calls, board demands, but she didn't answer. The TV across the room played a news segment, Malik's photo beside her own. Her smirk from that fateful day played again and again. If you can fix this thing. She muted the sound. Her reflection looked older than she remembered. For the first time in years, she felt something like shame. Down in the city, Malik met Kira at the same diner. She slid into the booth opposite him, laptop open. The screen filled with emails from major networks. They want interviews, she said. Your story's gone national. Not my story, he said. It's bigger than me. You realize what this means? Voltage will face federal investigation. The Department of Transportation already reached out. Malik stirred his coffee. I didn't want revenge. Just truth. Truth has a habit of getting loud. He smiled faintly. Then maybe it's about time. Rusty's head rested on his lap, tail thumping softly. Kira looked at the dog and laughed. You really trust that mutt with evidence? He's the only one who doesn't lie. They talked for an hour, voices low, planning how to protect themselves when the company inevitably struck back. But Malik wasn't afraid. He'd survived worse storms. The difference now was that people were finally listening. That night, as he walked home through the quiet streets, snow beginning to fall again, he passed a storefront where televisions displayed his face. Beneath it scrolled the words, "Mechanic exposes corporate corruption, CEO under investigation." He almost laughed. "Not bad for a janitor," he murmured. Back at Voltage, the board convened an emergency meeting. Vivian entered the room like someone walking to her own funeral. The chairman's voice was calm but final. "Vivian, the evidence is overwhelming. You'll step down effective immediately. The company will cooperate fully with federal regulators." She didn't argue. She only asked, "What about him? Turner? The board owes him an apology." Vivian nodded once, lips pressed tight, and walked out. Outside, the press swarmed. Questions flew, cameras flashed. She didn't answer a single one. At the same hour, Malik stood by the river, the city lights shimmering on the water. Rusty chased snowflakes, barking softly. His phone buzzed an email from Kira. "They cleared you. You're officially a hero." He smiled, shaking his head. "Heroes are for movies." He looked toward the horizon where smoke from the factories met the clouds. "I just fixed what was broken." Rusty trotted up beside him, pressing against his leg. Malik bent to scratch his ears. "We did good, partner. But I think the world still needs a lot of fixing." The wind carried the faint sound of church bells across the city. For the first time in years, Malik felt light, as if the weight of silence had finally lifted. Somewhere in the Voltage headquarters, the lights flickered one last time before shutting off completely, an empire rebooting, forced to learn humility from a man who never had any power but all the integrity in the world. 3 months later, spring came slowly to Detroit, washing the soot of winter off the city's steel bones. The Voltage Tower still stood tall but quieter now, its logo newly repainted after the scandal that had nearly burned it down. The lobby smelled of disinfectant and fresh beginnings. Malik Turner hadn't set foot inside since the day they dragged him out in handcuffs, but now he stood at the front gate again, dressed in a clean shirt and a worn leather jacket, Rusty sitting obediently at his heel. A new security guard looked up from the desk, his face lighting with recognition. "You're the guy," he said softly. "The mechanic." Malik smiled. "Just here for a meeting." Upstairs, the boardroom was no longer a battlefield. Voltage had a new CEO, a calm woman named Teresa Clark, who'd once been in charge of the company's safety division before being pushed aside by Vivian years earlier. She stood to greet him, her handshake firm, her voice warm. "Mr. Turner," she said, "thank you for coming. I wanted to thank you personally for saving lives, and for forcing us to see what we refused to." "You don't owe me thanks," he said, "just make it right. We're trying. The V9 line has been suspended, and we've implemented new transparency standards. We also set aside funds for community training programs. I was hoping you'd lead one." Malik blinked. "Me? You've got experience, credibility, and more integrity than half our management combined. We're calling it Rusty's Workshop. A vocational program for veterans and displaced workers. It'll be fully funded. You'd be in charge." Malik looked down at Rusty, who wagged his tail as if he understood. He felt a slow warmth spread through his chest. "All right," he said finally. "Let's build something honest for once." A week later, the old warehouse near the river was buzzing again. New paint, clean tools. Rows of workbenches gleaming under bright lights. The sign outside read Rusty's Workshop, built by hands that don't quit. Veterans, single parents, and laid-off mechanics filled the space, learning how to repair electric engines, rebuild confidence, and find purpose again. Malik moved among them with quiet patience, teaching by example. "Respect the machine," he'd say. "It remembers how you treat it." Rusty roamed freely, tail wagging, occasionally stealing a glove or napkin from someone's pocket, earning laughter wherever he went. Sometimes, when the room fell into that steady rhythm of labor, Malik felt peace settle around him like sunlight on metal. In the evenings, he would lock up and sit on the porch outside, watching the river flow past the factories. The city skyline glowed orange and gold. He'd take a deep breath and feel, for the first time in years, that he belonged to something good. One evening, as he was wiping his hands clean, a sleek black sedan pulled up. The door opened, and Vivian Cole stepped out. She wore no suit, no entourage, just jeans, a gray coat, and an expression stripped of armor. Malik froze. Rusty barked once, not angrily but as if recognizing a ghost. Vivian approached slowly, carrying a small box in her hands. "You've built quite a place," she said quietly. It's not much, Malik replied. But it's honest. She nodded, looking around the workshop, the neat rows of tools, the chalkboard covered in notes, the laughter drifting from the back room. Honesty, she murmured. That's the thing I lost somewhere along the way. She extended the box. I wanted you to have this. Malik hesitated, then opened it. Inside lay the wrench he'd used to fix her engine that first day, polished to a soft shine. A small engraving had been added. Respect earned. He stared at it for a long time. You didn't have to do this, he said finally. Yes, I did. I lost everything. Mr. Turner, my job, my reputation, my illusion of control. But the truth you forced me to face probably saved lives. It also reminded me that power without humility is just another kind of failure. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She turned to leave, then paused. I'm volunteering with a nonprofit now, teaching young entrepreneurs what not to become. Maybe it's not redemption, but it's a start. Malik nodded slowly. Everyone starts somewhere. She gave a small, sad smile, then walked back to her car. As the taillights disappeared into the dark, Malik turned the wrench over in his hands. Rusty rested his head on Malik's knee. Guess some people do learn, he whispered. The days passed into summer. Rusty's workshop grew. Word spread about the program, and soon local schools and community groups partnered with them. Men and women who'd lost hope found purpose in grease and circuitry. They learned that fixing engines wasn't just about bolts and wires, it was about patience, about listening. Malik often thought about the people watching from their cars outside, those who had once mocked him and now waved when they passed. It wasn't triumph he felt. It was balance. Sometimes, on quiet Sundays, he drove out to the cemetery where his father rested. He'd sit by the headstone, wrench in hand, and talk softly. You were right, Pop. The world respects what it needs. But sometimes you can teach it what to need. The wind rustled the grass, as if answering him. One afternoon, Kira stopped by the workshop with a camera crew. You're a hard man to reach, she teased. That's on purpose. Malik replied, grinning. She laughed. The network wants to air a follow-up segment. The story still inspires people. Second chances. Accountability. All that good stuff. I thought you might want to say a few words. What would I even say? Maybe something about justice. He thought for a moment, then looked into the camera lens. Justice isn't about revenge, he said slowly. It's about repair. It's about taking what's broken and choosing not to walk away. Sometimes it's noisy. Sometimes it's quiet. But it always leaves something better behind. When the interview aired, messages poured in from across the country. Veterans, mechanics, single mothers, people who'd been written off. They saw in Malik not a hero, but a mirror. And that was enough. Late one evening, after everyone had gone home, Malik turned off the lights and stood in the doorway, the smell of oil and metal still hanging in the air. Rusty lay at his feet, snoring softly. Outside, Detroit glimmered in the distance, alive and imperfect. Malik looked at the engraved wrench on his desk and whispered. We fixed it, Dad. Not just the machine. He closed the door, the night swallowing the hum of the city. Somewhere far away, a train horn echoed through the dark. Steady and strong, a reminder that some engines never stop, they just find new tracks. And as Malik walked home under the streetlights with Rusty trotting beside him, he smiled to himself, feeling the quiet kind of justice that doesn't need applause, only the sound of a heart still running true.